In the meantime,
South Africa is very optimistic that conflicts on the continent will be resolved. And speaking to SABC correspondent Sarah Kimani in Mauritania, President Cyril Ramaphosa said the high-level meeting on South Sudan has agreed that those who are violating the ceasefire must be punished. The president also spoke about the current situation and the upcoming elections in Zimbabwe.
We discussed a whole number of issues, including peace and security issues. And we specifically focused on South Sudan, where the C5 countries, as they are called, have been dealing with this matter. But that also included what we've been doing in dealing with the matter from, South Africa. And we appreciated very much so the Khartoum declaration that was signed between Salva Kiir and Dr. Riek Machar, where they committed themselves to a permanent ceasefire, that they want the guns to be silenced in South Sudan and the war to come to an end. So we appreciated that and embraced the spirit that they generated in Khartoum as they were watched by President Museveni and President al-Bashir. Now, our welcoming of that agreement was based on the fact that we do not want to see a violation of that agreement. We want to see them commit themselves completely and totally so that the war comes to an end. And we also felt that if there is a violation of this agreement, there should be consequences. We cannot keep on reaching agreement after agreement and people just violate it and nothing happens. And in fact, the world, including the people of South Sudan, expect that this time it must last and it must be a permanent ceasefire. So we want to hold them to it, and we don't want any one of them to violate it. And we are also relying on them meeting a few more times to consolidate that peace agreement as they have committed to do, and so that there's a good transitional government in South Sudan leading up to elections so that the people of South Sudan can at last have peace, and lasting peace, and set up a democratic government.
Now, within hours of the cessation of hostilities agreement taking place, it was violated several times. Indeed, as we speak now, in an area called Maban in the Upper Nile state, 18 people have died, and both sides are already saying, you did it, you did it. What are you going to do about it? The people of South Sudan are tired.
The people of South Sudan indeed are tired, and the problem with South Sudan is that they've now become, it's become an area of so many militias. And I doubt very much whether they have full and total control of the various forces that are marauding throughout the country. So it is also going to be difficult to pin it down on any of the players. What we should really seek to do is to focus on the two role players, Riek Machar as well as Salva Kiir, consolidate peace around them, and they will then be able to spread it around. Because if we don't do that, then there's no hope for South Sudan. So we are focusing on the two protagonists. And if we can get them to hold on to the peace process, then we should be able to have peace in South Sudan.
IGAD has been accused of being partisan and being the ones that almost make it difficult for the region to, for South Sudan to have a lasting peace. Did you feel from the leaders who are here from IGAD that there is that political will to see this time that indeed these two, Salva Kiir and Riek Machar, are held to account, and that indeed this time we should see sanctions against not the generals but these two men?
Well, I got a sense that IGAD has been trying the best that they can. They've obviously been very frustrated themselves by the continuous violations of the peace process. But this time around, I have a sense that IGAD is so serious that they will not tolerate any direct violation of the peace. And if need be, they will take drastic action and apply sanctions against those who are violating the peace process willy-nilly. So I see a renewed determination, a renewed commitment, and a renewed energy and focus on making sure that the peace holds. And I think all of us should really support them in this process. South Sudan has been through a really horrendous period. What makes it worse is that the economy has almost collapsed. There's no further oil production, which is the main source of their revenue collection. And now we need to support them and hope that the countries around South Sudan are going to come in and support. Sudan will help with the restarting of oil production, and other partners will also assist. And I think that if we can get a good number of countries participating and contributing, it will defocus those who want to, mess up the peace. And the economy will start to grow, and people will now be more focused on what they can get out of the economy rather than what they can do in destroying the lives of people.
Two very important elections coming up, the Democratic Republic of Congo and Zimbabwe.
Yes.
Let's start with Zimbabwe. It looked like it was going to be a very peaceful election, but then again, this past weekend we saw the terrorist attack, so to speak. Are you concerned? Are you doing anything about it as neighbors?
Well, as a neighbor, and particularly as a chairperson of SADC, I've had extensive discussions with President Mnangagwa soon after that hand grenade explosion, as well as now during the summit. I had a long discussion with him, and he gave me a perspective. And I think those who sought to attack and kill him were really making an assault against democracy in Zimbabwe. We are very, very pleased that he survived, and it seems like it was a once-off type of attempt.
Let's hope it was.
Let's hope it is, and that the stability and the peace will hold. Other than that, I'm confident that they will have a peaceful election. Everything seems to indicate in that direction. I don't see anything that would seem to indicate that they will have an election that will be disturbed, that will be violent, and that will be destabilized.
Do you see an election happening in December in the DRC?
I see an election happening in the DRC because the president of the DRC, President Kabila, has assured the leaders in SADC when we met in Luanda that all preparations are in place for an election to take place. They've registered more than 40 million voters. They've already decided that they are going to have an electronic-based type of election. They have got the money to fund the election. They're inviting observers to come.
Including yourselves,
including ourselves as the SADC region. So I think all that bodes well for an election to take place.
And President Kabila, will he be vying? Can you trust him not to vie?
Well, the indications we've got is that he's not going to be vying for elections himself. So other candidates now have to register. They have to go out and start campaigning. I am confident that an election will take place. I think people are investing a lot of their hopes, their emotion, their trust in an election, and let us give the DRC a chance to be engulfed by this democratic process. And indications now are that they are going to go to the elections and they will have a free and fair election.
Now, South Africans were following the proceedings of the African Union, and they have two questions for you from the social media. They're asking, President, we saw you signing the agreement for the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. What does it mean for the common man in South Africa?
Well, Africa exploded on a very, very historic moment by signing an Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is going to create a free trade agreement on the continent without the impediments of tariffs, which lifts prices a bit too high for the ordinary person. But it is also going to unleash the economic activity on the continent, in that products will now be produced on the African continent, and they'll cost a lot less than the products we keep on importing from other continents. It will also lead to people starting businesses knowing that they can sell products at an affordable rate and they can spread them throughout the continent. So for South Africans, I would say this is good news, because South Africa can produce products that can find themselves throughout the continent without those people in those countries paying much more, to a point of not being able to afford. So if we produce shoes, we can now sell them in the continent, and we will be competing against shoes that are brought from outside the continent, from other countries, because we will sell them on a tariff-free basis, and so it will lead to more production in South Africa, and those other countries can also bring their products to South Africa, and the people of South Africa can afford those products that will be produced elsewhere. So what that means is that it will open up the economies of our continent, various countries, and it will lead to what? To manufacturing, improved manufacturing, increased manufacturing, and it will lead to industrialization on our continent. So we will stop relying on products from other continents.
Okay, and still on Twitter, somebody's saying fuel prices are skyrocketing. We cannot be able to manage our lives. What is the president doing about it?
Well, we are concerned about the hike in fuel prices. The unfortunate part is that we are price takers. We import our fuel from oil-producing countries, and it's a function of the rand-dollar exchange rate. As the price of oil goes up for everyone in the world, it affects us negatively. But we want, obviously, to see how best we can cushion the people of South Africa against continued price hikes of the fuel. And discussions must now happen within our own country, with our companies that sell fuel. I am personally very, very concerned, because it increases the cost of living for many of our people. They are already suffering from increased VAT. They are already suffering from increased food prices, because the hiking of the price of fuel leads to the hiking of transport costs, leads to the hiking of food prices, and many others. So our people are really suffering, and I am sensitive to that, and we will want to have discussions and see how we can help ameliorate this situation through discussions that we can help.
And I leave the last one, the tail end, the elephant in the room. This meeting was about fighting corruption on the continent. Yes. It is one of the most corrupt continents on earth, most of the countries. And you yourself spoke about state capture in South Africa. Did you feel the political will from the other leaders? And are you willing, as South Africa, to face head-on the issue of corruption?
Well, I was really heartened to hear a number of leaders on the continent talking so openly about corruption and how corruption actually impedes and prevents our countries on the African continent from developing. African leaders were saying that we need to bring an end to corruption, to do everything that we can to address corruption, to set up institutions that will fight corruption, to ensure that corruption is dealt with at all levels, both in the public sector as well as in the private sector, so that as we deal with corruption, there is no focus on one area or one source of corruption. We should look at all sources of corruption, bring it to an end, strengthen our corruption fighting and busting institutions, and make sure that the illicit flow of funds that are leaving the African continent are brought to an end, and the money that has been stolen, that has been taken illegally through fraud and other ways, is brought back to develop the continent. So I found it very refreshing to be with leaders here who know what corruption is doing in terms of underdeveloping our continent, and who also feel that we should bring an end to corruption. So that was great, because the commitment is there, the focus is there, and I think we now have a better handle.
Even by yourself, South Africa and President Ramaphosa?
Oh yes, in South Africa we are determined. We are determined, and we are now taking steps and moves to deal with corruption. We're strengthening our institutions of dealing with corruption. We're making sure that those people who are found to be corrupt are accountable.
The big fish?
They are dealt with, whether they are big fish or small fish. We want people to be accountable whenever they are found to have done things that are corrupt.